All right, I'm back and live. This is Gordon Ghazi, part two of the video that I just completed. Pardon coughing. I've got a bit of allergies going on right now. Love the warm weather, hate the pollen and everything else in the air. At any rate, I'm going to cut right to the chase and give my prediction about what we're looking at in the coming weeks and month or two. Up until recently, I've been predicting that sometime this coming week that Mark Carney would be going to the Governor General. Her name is Simon, and asking that Parliament be formally dissolved for the purposes of sending Canadians into a general election. That has been what I've been predicting up until now. I do think that's still possible. Danny has stuck around. Thanks for coming back on. I had a lot of people watching on the first go round, and then my connection was lagging horribly. And so my connection was unstable and all kinds of things like that. So when that happens, I shut it down, reboot, and that's about the extent of my technical skill, is to turn things off and back on again. I'm an old dinosaur. Not so old that I can't have a YouTube channel, but I don't have the production values and I don't have the robust interconnections that someone in a major city center like Toronto or Ottawa or the big urban centers would have. I'm out in the in a rural area in the sticks, Northumberland County, Ontario. About if you drive down the 401 from Oshawa, you get about an hour east on the way to Kingston. You're in my neighborhood, an area famous for apple orchards. At any rate, so my prediction for the coming weeks, months, 703T is here. Uh, and he's saying that I'm not old. I'm seasoned. I like that. Yeah, I'm not old. We deny the fabric of reality and we deny, we think we're going to live forever. I know I'm not going to. I know that at some point I'm going to cross that veil and I'm going to go home. But at any rate, um, uh, so what's going to happen? I do think it's still possible that Mark Carney will go to the Governor General next week, but I don't think it's likely. I think what is more likely to happen is that Mark Carney he's in the enviable position from a political standpoint of being at the top of the news cycle darn near constantly. Every newscast that you tune into, Mark Carney is going to be one of the first or second story is going to involve Mark Carney and his Liberal government, newly installed on Canadians as our prime minister. He's getting great coverage right now. And I was talking about it in that video that just ended. He just has reduced Canada's carbon tax. I don't remember what the level of it was, but it's been reduced now down to zero. The Liberals are framing it as they've canceled the carbon tax, but in point of fact, they haven't canceled it because they can't, because Parliament is suspended. And in order to completely remove carbon taxation as a mechanism, then that would require an act of Parliament. That would require passage through the House of Commons, the Senate, and the signature of the Governor General. And none of that can take place when Parliament is suspended. So instead, they used something called an order in council. And they've reduced carbon taxation down to 0%. And they're marketing it as we've canceled the carbon tax. And to a degree, I'm not going to play on semantics. If you take something down to zero, it might as well not exist. And so he's getting blanket coverage on that front. He's getting blanket coverage over the so-called trade war that we're having with the Americans right now, because we're about to hit them. I think it's on April 1st or 2nd, and we're going to hammer the hell out of the Canadian small business sector again, as we impose blanket tariffs on all manner of goods coming into Canada. It's little understood, and it needs to be understood, that when Donald Trump imposes tariffs on imports coming into the United States from Canada, that is inflationary in the American economy. Yes, it does impact Canada because they're our biggest export trading partner, Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum. So we send lots of steel and aluminum into the US. So this obviously would impact those specific sectors of our economy, but it wouldn't be broad based. And we have Doug Ford in Ontario and Mark Carney in Ottawa saying that the government is, going to be there with God, goodness knows, probably billions of dollars to prop up impacted um, sectors of the economy with this looming trade war. But what Canada is doing is that by retaliating and imposing tariffs on goods coming into Canada from the United States, that's going to be inflationary on everyone. The cost of everything is going to be going up in another couple weeks when we start retaliating against the Trump administration. And I've done enough videos already talking about my views on what's going on. This is all being orchestrated by the Chinese. It sounds conspiratorial and it sounds crazy, and I get that. I would invite you to watch my previous video, I guess yesterday, the video I did yesterday that shows Biden down being held on a leash by Jinping, or however, whatever the chairman of the Communist Party of China, the leader of China, has got Biden on a leash. I think the Chinese Communist Party has a lot of Western politicians on a leash. I think they're either bribed or I think they've been compromised and are doing the bidding of China and not looking after citizens in the United States, citizens of Canada, citizens of Western Europe. Sharunian has shown up. And I'm on Top Chat again. Got to switch it back to live chat so I get all the messages. I hate censorship. Sharunya is writing that Canada is turning into a third world country. And economically, certainly. The standard of living keeps getting driven lower and lower. We have Mark Print More Money Carney now installed as the Prime Minister of Canada, famous for his use of quantitative easing to mitigate against economic hard times. The manner in which this has been fought in the past under guys like Mark Carney is to engage in what they call quantitative easing, and nuts and bolts. What it basically means is increase the amount of money, the money supply, buy up government issued bonds to inject lots, just print more money and give it to the government to spread out. It's like, and if you think about our monetary supply, think of it as a light loaf of bread, and you're used to getting a slice that big. When they engage in quantitative easing, what they're doing is just giving you a thinner and thinner slice of that loaf of bread. And thank you, Danny has given me the name, and I still can't pronounce it regardless. Xi Jinping. And it's probably the best I can do. My Mandarin is beyond poor. I only know ni hao, xie xie, and boka chi. A little bit of Mandarin. I have nothing against someone who is ethnically Chinese. I do have an issue, a big issue, with the Chinese Communist Party and with communism in general. If you are a lover of freedom, if you're a lover of democracy, if you cherish free speech, the right, freedom of assembly, the rights that we cherish in the Western world are at odds with the manner in which the Chinese Communist Party operates. Ask political protesters in Hong Kong how they feel about the imposition of communist rule on that former British colony. And now I'm just going to go through the messages before I tell you what I think is going to happen. Danny is writing that Carney has already lied, yet it unfortunately won't be a major red flag for most Canadian people. What lies has Mark Carney told? Technically, we can say that he lied in terms of saying he's going to cancel the carbon tax, or that he has canceled it, and he hasn't. But he has reduced it down to zero by an order in council. So that could be seen as semantics, fair enough. But he did lie to Canadians during the leadership race, the leadership coronation There was never any question that Mark Carney was going to be handed the role of prime minister. That was a foregone conclusion. But during their dog and pony show that they had, Carney claimed that his former company, the company that he was chairman of the board for, Brookfield Asset Management, um, they voted to have their head office moved down from Toronto down to New York City, where his wife lives and where Mark Carney himself used to live. He likes living abroad. He's lived in England, lived in New York. He's only just recently come back to Canada. Some might suggest he's just visiting. Uh, he lied and said that this the move of Brookfield Asset Management from Toronto to New York, that he wasn't part of that decision and that it happened in December after he vacated that position. That was a lie. The decision to move the head offices from Toronto to New York took place in October when he was still chairman of the board. It was under his direction that Brookfield Asset Management took high-paying Canadian jobs and said, we don't want these, nice high-paying jobs in Canada. Let's send them down to New York City. So that was an obvious lie. He also tries to put off, poo-poos, for lack of a better expression. I'm not a big fan of that one. His association with Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein, noted pedophile and criminal. And his wife is buddy apparently, or has been, with Ghislaine Maxwell, who's now in jail. And they were rubbing shoulders together, Mark Carney and Ghislaine Maxwell. And he says, well, my wife knew her. I don't. Yeah, sure, Mark. Go back to New York, go back to London. Let's read what's being said. Danny is of the opinion as well with me that Canada has been compromised. It's just a question to what levels. I mean, these games have always gone on between Western and hostile nations. And they happened, the old Soviet Union. I wish I could remember the name of the Russian spy who was famously turned, Gursky. It was an affair in Ottawa back all the way in the 1950s when the Canadian government had been compromised by Soviet influencers, by Soviet actors. Well, if you don't think that's still continuing to this very day with the Chinese, you're woefully naive. Yes, and Danny is talking about how quantitative easing is what George Carlin would refer to as soft language, euphemistic language. Instead of just telling you what things are, they soften the language to make it sound more palatable. So you're printing more money? No, it's quantitative easing. Well, that's printing more money, isn't it? No. Quantitative easing. Quantitative means size. Easing, so you're reducing the size. No, we're increasing the size of the money supply. What we're easing is the restrictions on the money supply. We're taking away the restrictions that ensure everyone, when they get their slice of that loaf, when they're slice of that loaf, we're taking away the restrictions that keep it nice and big, and we're giving everyone little tiny. If you're wondering why Canadian housing has doubled in cost over the course of the Trudeau Liberals, there's your reason. This is why no one in Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton, the Calgary, the major cities, why people growing up here can't afford to buy a house. Meanwhile, why hasn't the housing market collapsed? Well, we have an open immigration policy. And what's been happening is that Canada has been flooded by immigrants coming into Canada. A lot of immigrants are coming from India. I don't blame the expat Indians for coming to Canada. We're a great country, but what has happened is you'll have individuals getting high levels of education in India, in engineering, in medicine, in technicians, all manner of professions, and what they do is they are recruited to go work in the Middle East. They work in Saudi Arabia, a lot of the Emirate states like Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. So they go there, they earn US dollars, quite often like high six-figure salaries. An engineer working in Saudi Arabia might be earning 200 grand a year, US dollars. There's no tax in Saudi Arabia or throughout the Emirate states, Qatar, and the rest. So there's no income tax. And if you have husband's an engineer, wife is a medical technician, they're making $400,000 a year US. They'll work there for 10, 15 years, go over when they're 24, 25, work there till they're 40 or so. And they'll invest, if they invest well and save their money well, they can live on one salary or less. And then then after they turn around 40 years of age, the thing is you can't retire. You cannot retire in Saudi Arabia or Qatar or any of these other Middle Eastern countries. You'll never be given citizenship. So they've got their 10 million US in the bank, and then they start to look for where can we retire? Where can we live out the rest of our days? And they start looking to Australia, Canada, and the US are three primary destinations, Western Europe as well. But Canada, the US, and Australia are huge. And they have 10 million US. And they come and they move to Toronto and they look and they see a house that's $1 million bucks. And they're like, I'll buy three. And that just drives up the housing market. So this is why Canadians who have been born and bred in Canada haven't been working for 10, 15, 20 years in the Middle East who are earning Canadian dollars, getting taxed up the wazoo. Probably in and around 50% of the money that Canadians earn goes to one level of taxation or another, either in income taxes, consumption taxes, hidden corporate taxes. It's just tax after tax after tax. And so individuals coming from overseas who haven't been subject to this horrible level of taxation that we have here in Canada, they're able to come in, they flood the real estate market, they start buying up houses. And what happens to our real estate market? Kid who's grown up here and is working, I don't know, HVAC, making 35, 40 bucks an hour in Toronto, he's priced right out of the market, even though he's making a fairly decent living by Canadian standards. Sharunian is writing, East Indians are so racist towards Black, just their attitude. You know what? I can't speak to that at all, because I know a lot of Indians and I don't see it. I don't see that. I see some who are, some who aren't. I don't like to make blanket statements about any particular group. I try to avoid it. We need to get to know each other on an individual basis. And the high school in our town, ENSS, East Northumberland Secondary School, is becoming more diverse. It's still predominantly kids of European descent, white kids, but we're seeing people leaving the GTA, moving out here. This area that I live in, Brighton, is becoming more racially diverse, and I see kids of every background all hanging out together, and good. I think it's wonderful. I love seeing a group of students who are, you've got white, you got Black, you got Indian, you got Chinese, you got everyone all mixing together, because that's where the hope lies, is in our youth. Anyway, John 5 is here and is writing, will the Canadian population know about Ghislaine Maxwell and Miss Carney, or they won't know and won't care? I think with that particular story that there's a lot of willful blindness. Canadians don't want to confront the fact that what happened on Epstein's Island with his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the thought that, now we have the wife of the Prime Minister of Canada was buddy with Ghislaine Maxwell, and that's just a little too uncomfortable. So we'll pretend it didn't happen. We'll pretend it's not real. We'll put it in the realm of tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, even though, well, those pictures are probably photoshopped. Well, Mark Carney has acknowledged that he was at those events with Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, he said he doesn't know her that well, that he's only met her a few times, and I'll believe him. I'll believe Mr. Print More Money. John 5 is further writing that Poilievre and Carney's programs are too similar. according to what John 5 has heard. I heard Pierre Poilievre on a liberal-minded podcast being asked about the whole woke thing and about how many genders there are, and Poilievre affirmed that there are two. There are two genders. Says if there are more, let me know. Let me know. What are some of the others? I've only ever known two. I liked his answer. Then we can contrast that with Mark Carney, who is all in on this woke ideology and says that we need to become more woke. We even have in the United States Gavin Newsom, governor of the state of California, which is as woke a jurisdiction as you're ever going to find in the United States. And even he now is pulling back on this woke garbage nonsense of boys competing with girls in sports and such, and he's walking it back. And here in Canada, we got Mark Carney doubling down on this woke garbage nonsense. We're going to have a hard time. Conservative-minded candidates are going to have, or conservative-minded Canadians are going to have a hard time defeating Mark Carney. I said that a few months ago, probably about 1-2 months ago. I started speculating that Mark Carney would come in and be installed as the new Liberal leader, and it's come to pass. And I was saying back then that Mark Carney has the potential that he could knock the Conservatives down to a minority and maybe even win government themselves. And I had a lot of comments on here during my live stream saying, oh, it never happened. Canadians will never be fooled again. We will see what happens. If the polling is to be believed right now, it's a horse race between the Liberals and Conservatives. We believe the Conservatives ballyhooed the polls when the Conservatives had a 20-point lead. Look, but now that the polls have even back up, now, well, you can't trust the polls. So you believe them when they're in your favor, but you don't believe them when they show the opposite of what you want. That's sucking and blowing at the same time. If you're going to believe the polls when the Conservatives were up 20 points, well, look at them now. From multiple sources, from Ecos, from Leger, from Main Street Research, from Angus Reid. Look at all the polling. Some are more friendly to the Liberals than others, but it's a horse race. And you have to remember that the last two elections, 2019, 2021, the Liberals did not even win the popular vote, but they still managed to maintain their grip on power. Just going to read. Brett Skinner is here, and who is an American from Wyoming, says people haven't been able to afford housing and land for many, many years. I wonder what's like in Wyoming, which is a very rural state. Danny is writing, if George were alive today, George Carlin, he'd have material for 1,000 years. Rest in peace. Amen. I love George Carlin. Incredibly sharp mind. He was a wordsmith. He knew how to dissect language at such an incredibly sharp level. But anyway, Cryptomir is writing, it's gross. More people should be concerned. And Brett is saying, as far as people my age and younger forget being a owner. Yeah. You've been priced out of the market. Those who are, in around the 40s and younger, forget it. Especially in particular, if you live in larger urban centers. In Canada, forget Vancouver, forget Toronto. You're never going to own a home. It's not going to happen. Unless you win the lottery, unless you come into a large sum of money, unless you're able to get a job that's going to pay you a six-figure salary, you damn near need 7 now. Brett Skinner is writing, but just remember, folks, governments can just keep spending and spending. The sky is the limit for them. Well, there's a tendency in government. I've been using the analogy of you have a loaf of bread and it's all a matter of how thin or thick the slices are. Well, the governments often tend to think of themselves as a bakery. We'll just bake more bread. We'll just flood the market. Quantitative easing. And what do we see? Inflation. We see housing prices double. We see a cart full of groceries costing $300-400 to feed a family of 4 or 5. How people are surviving? And the government is there to say, well, here, we'll give you back some of the carbon taxation. We'll give you a GST rebate. We'll give you tax credits for this, that, and the other thing. that will mitigate things. You're going to become dependent on government to survive. We're here to be big brother. We're here to inject ourselves into every aspect of your life. Forget liberty. Give it up. We'll keep you safe. We'll keep you fed. We'll give you bread and circuses. Don't revolt. And Bob's your uncle. Danny's writing. Brett is saying that there's horrible taxation in the United States as well. Danny's writing, if Canadians just stopped watching all mainstream media, as I did, and actually started critically thinking for themselves, this country would be better off. They would not fall for hoaxes. You know, the Canadian population is easy to lead around by the nose. We've got everyone wearing these Canada Not for Sale hats and these elbows up. No one checks the tag inside that says made in China. And even if they do, they don't care because the TV is telling them to be angry about the Americans, but they're not saying anything about China, which has been proven by CSIS and by the RCMP. They detailed information on how the Chinese interfered in Canada's electoral process at local riding nominations for the Liberal Party of Canada. And we don't care. We don't care because it's to elbows up. I can understand that. How the Communist Party of China was able to infiltrate our democratic process, well, that's too hard to understand. Elbows up against the Americans. We're dumb. We're a dumb population. Danny's writing that food in the States is way cheaper than in Canada, and typically it is. Some items are not. You know, some things we do better on. Eggs are cheaper here right now because they've been culling. They've been slaughtering millions. I don't know how many millions of chickens have been taken out in the United States in a stupid effort to eliminate bird flu. And it's like trying to eliminate carbon from the atmosphere. Carbon is plant food. What are boreal forests and our softwood lumber? What you know, all the fir trees in BC? What are they going to eat? Carbon is plant food. Remember photosynthesis from when you were in what grade 9, 10 biology, whenever it was, maybe grade 7 or 8. Brett is writing, Danny, wrong cause. There are more stupid out there than those of us who know how screwed up we are in this world. Some of it is willful blindness. I think a lot of people look at the situation and it can be stark, it can be depressing, and so it's for their own mental health in a fashion. People decide to turn a blind eye to things like, you know, Pedophile Island with Jeffrey Epstein and his girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell, and they'll ignore the fact that our new prime minister has a cozy relationship. His wife has a cozy relationship, or had one at least, with Ghislaine Maxwell when she was engaged in these heinous crimes, that they were buddy-buddy. And that's too difficult to look into. And if you do look into it, it's too unsettling. So it's easier just to turn a blind eye and just trust. Place blind trust. I actually had this thought rolling through my mind last week about the abuse of trust that has happened going pretty much my entire life. You look at the Vietnam War in the United States, and Americans trusted their government when the government told them that it was an imperative to stop the growth of communist influence in the Far East, and that dominoes would fall. And there was trust, and 50,000 plus American men went to their deaths on this because they trusted their government. Then I look at 9/11, and you know, we saw what happened. 3 buildings in New York City collapsed in on themselves, almost like controlled demolition. The most startling example was Building 7, not hit by an airplane, 45 stories big. If you stuck it in Boise, Idaho, or Dubuque, it would be probably be the biggest building in town. And it fell down like a perfectly controlled demolition. And afterward, the George W. Bush administration pushed back against the idea of having an inquiry into the intelligence and security failures that allowed all the events of that day to take place. We're too busy fighting the war on terror. We don't have time to investigate what happened. That should have been a red flag for a lot of people. But if it turns out that for average Joe American puts a lot of faith and trust in their government, that they are working in the best interests of the American people, and it's too uncomfortable a reality for a lot of people to realize that the very institutions in which you place so much trust to look after your safety and security, if they are working at countermeasures and actually endangering you, that's too uncomfortable. That is far too uncomfortable. So it's easier to trick yourself and say, well, they were just mistakes. It was just mistakes. I equate it to this. We've all known that mother who has a young teenage daughter and loves to talk her daughter up. Oh, she's a straight A student. She helps out at the church. She volunteers at the old age home. She's amazing, my daughter. Walks on water, halo on her head. And then that same mother will go into her daughter's room, look in the top drawer, and find birth control pills, condoms, drugs, joints, meth, who knows. And she's aghast. And, oh my gosh, the illusion is shattered. My daughter is doing drugs. She's engaging in premarital sex. Oh my God. And then confronts the daughter, and the daughter says, oh, that stuff isn't mine. No, a friend of mine had that stuff, and I was afraid she'd get caught by her parents, so I took it from her. I was meaning to get rid of it, but I just forgot. And the mother, now a smart individual, would go, you're lying. But that means that you're going to deconstruct her whole world and this illusion she has about her daughter. So a lot of parents will at that point go, oh, thank goodness. I can rebuild that sandcastle in the sky of my daughter as this paragon of virtue. It's the same dynamic at play with our governments. There's this illusion there that our democratic process is there to ensure that our politicians are working in the best interests of average Joe and Jane Canadian or average Joe and Jane American in the US. Let's see, I'm going to catch up with what's being written, and then I'm going to end the video. I'm sorry I had to break it into two. Next time when I do one a night or two from now, I'm going to reboot before I start. This seems to have worked. Brett is writing, the crazy thing is when I hear elders say, I don't know how people are surviving nowadays, and I'm glad I'm not your age. No kidding. I hear that all the time. I don't know how young people are surviving. Brett is writing, it's insane how you can have 1.13K subscribers, but only 4 people watching on the live stream. A lot of people will hit the subscribe button and then never watch back. They'll like one thing I happen to say, and okay, I've got a lot of subscriptions that I don't pay close attention to. There are services that I could engage, and I promise you I haven't, but I can't prove it, that you can pay a service. I don't know how much they cost. I've never investigated it, but I do get contacted by will improve your reach. I think what they do is they employ bots. You give them a few $100 maybe, and your videos all of a sudden start getting 2,000, 10,000, 100,000 views, and you can buy subscribers. I don't engage in that, but anyway. Danny is writing, PCR tested birds for bird flu, COVID, etc. What a joke. It's all about control, nothing else. Government created scarcity, all part of the plan. 2030, no red meat, no dairy, total food control. And Danny's writing that we are loyal, Brett. Yeah, that's, who knows? We'll see how she grows over time. I seem to go through periods where I'm flat and then I grow, then I'm flat and go down a bit, and then I grow. We'll see how it goes. I think when an election coming up, if I do more political commentary, there seems to be demand for that. Danny is writing, Jesus is King. I haven't mentioned yet, if anyone's new watching, I think Christianity does turn off some people. They do not want, and I imagine there are even some conservative-minded Canadians who are voting for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada and who yet want to distance themselves from Christian voices such as my own. And I get it. I understand it. The culture has conditioned, has programmed us to believe that anyone who espouses, who proclaims Jesus Christ as Lord, that we're supposed to be ignorant and all these other pejorative labels. And labeling works. Labeling works because people want shortcuts. Who should I listen to? Who shouldn't I? Well, he's a Christian. I don't have to listen now because they don't share my worldview. At any rate, what's going to happen is I think I'm just going to wrap it up now by saying what I think is going to happen is that Mark Carney is going to milk this out as much as he can. He's at the top of the news feed. And so there's an old line by P.T. Barnum that there's no such thing as bad advertising so long as they spell your name right. So Carney's name is out there regularly. Carbon tax down to zero, so it's been canceled, quote unquote. He's going to Europe to try and drum up support for our bogus trade war with the Americans. He's getting a lot of positive press right now. I think it's possible that he may even try and stick around for another month or two after this March 24th date when Parliament is set to reconvene. He might stick around longer than that. I don't think the NDP, the polling numbers for the NDP are horrific. They've fallen off a cliff. Their seat count is projected to go way down. So are the NDP going to be anxious to go to the polls right away when they could be decimated? No. So what they'll likely do is if Carney decides to reconvene Parliament and to put forth legislation and to revive Bill C-163, this online harms bill, okay, he might succeed in staying in power for a few months before going to the polls, maybe later in the summer. We'll find out. Anyway, Brett is wishing me peace. Peace be to you as well, my friend. Danny's saying people fear the truth for some reason. Often a tasty lie is preferable to a harsh reality. And the thought that Canada's political infrastructure has been infiltrated by the communist Chinese. No, I don't like the way that feels. So it's easier to pretend, whistle by the graveyard. Anyway, God bless. I like to end my videos. Everyone knows. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and lift up his countenance upon you. May the Lord be gracious to you. And may the Lord grant you peace. Even in these crazy times, he can. So we'll talk to y'all soon. Sorry about the disjointed nature. It would have been better if I could have done this in one shot. But it is what it is. Probably be going live in a day or two. We'll see what happens in the world. Good night, all. God bless.